What's going on, gamers? So we have an interesting video here from Digital Foundry updating us on the tech analysis on Black Myth Wukong. So we know about all the drama that happened with the Series S getting blamed and Sony money adding and it being a year behind. Well, there's some more bad news, and it's not from Xbox. It's from those developers again. And this is what I don't understand what the hell is going on behind the scenes. It appears that the Series X port is a bootleg port. You would think after waiting for that long and you're going to be optimizing your game more over time that they would have got an equal port to PlayStation 5. Well, guys, it's not equal. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but let's find out. Are we ready? Stick around. Here we go. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Black Myth Wukong is a phenomenon. Since the game launched a year ago, it's cleared tens of millions in sales across PS5 and PC. But two key consoles have been left out until now: Xbox Series S and X. So how does Wukong translate to Microsoft's current-gen consoles? Are these more sensible conversions than the flawed PS5 release?
I know after seeing that image, what I just saw, yeah, the resolution is lower on Xbox and something's going on. Global illumination is missing, all that. And I'm trying to remember, what was the last game I did where it did the same thing? On Xbox, they turned off
Most
global
games
illumination.
on Series X
Turned up the
closely
rest.
mirror their PS5 counterparts, but Black Myth Wukong is a stunning exception. If I flip back and forth between PS5 and Series X in performance mode, the problem should be obvious. Series X has a glowy, specular-rich, 7th gen console kind of look in these comparisons. It seems like the Series X version in performance mode runs with the game's lumen lighting system disabled. The PS5 version uses the SDF-based software version of the technique for diffuse and specular GI in all modes.
There is something interesting about global illumination and the lighting techniques when it comes to Sony and Microsoft. I'm noticing this because why is this happening again? What are developers not telling us? Well, in Digital Foundry is telling us, but I think you get what I mean. And I don't get why the port would look that much lesser. Like, over time, we're supposed to be getting better here.
But the Series X lacks the technique entirely in performance mode. This produces a very different rendition of Wukong's world, as a lot of the game's indirect lighting detail is simply missing. The game doesn't have some sophisticated baked GI alternative, so Wukong often appears radically worse off. Series X also packs much lower resolution shadows than PS5. Wukong uses conventional shadow maps, not VSM, and these tend to appear very blobby and approximate. There are some other visual differences, but they're dwarfed by the lighting changes.
Yeah, you see more intensity right here. Like I said, they're getting more and higher resolution. It doesn't make no sense to have that running like that over here on the X, not even the S. Right? They weren't lying when they said they need some help with optimizing. I think we see this now, but I also think that this is also a little bit off too. What I'm saying too is that some of that is true, and then they made that deal too because that was Sony that wanted that deal because it was a Chinese hero project. They didn't know they were going to sell 20-something million. You know what I mean? But after doing that, what are we doing here? Why is this not dumped into this to be good? You have all that money. What are we doing, guys? I'm not, no. This is
Series X is almost unrecognizable at times.
it's questionable.
On the flip side though, Series X operates at a higher resolution. Microsoft's console seems to lie around 1296p or so, while PS5 seems pegged to about 1080p in my testing. That delta produces a modest advantage in clarity and edge detail compared to PS5,
Okay.
though it's not all that significant relative to the lumen loss. I've turned off the sharpening for the comparisons in this video to get a better idea of the underlying image, but performance radically favors the Series X. On the surface, frame rates seem similar enough between both consoles.
Okay.
PS5 targets and hits 60 FPS most of the time, and Series X accomplishes something similar, albeit with somewhat more frequent drops and screen tearing when below 60 FPS. That's full screen tearing too, not just the occasional tear in the top portion of the screen, as is more common in console software. But PS5 accomplishes 60 FPS by using FSR 3 frame gen, and Series X instead appears to render every unique frame. There are some tells, primarily the lack of artifacts around the corners of the frame, and reduced input lag when playing relative to PS5. Series X has no apparent signs of frame gen, while on PS5, the technique is immediately obvious. The opening of the game plays out without frame gen on PS5, but it appears to be used thereafter. This makes it a bit of a complicated face-off. Do you prioritize the console that runs at a genuine 60 FPS, or the console that has correct looking lighting. I'd probably shade toward PS5 here.
Because of the way that it's optimized. If that was fully optimized with having that, it would have the advantage. It's supposed to mathematically. Like when people see that too, and I see people, I said, dude, it's supposed to. Obviously, that's the only reason it's not happening. Because if you told me my PC was 20% better than that because of the upgrade, and his is performing better than mine, then how is it my PC's fault? It doesn't make sense to me. No, it's not. It's not a hardware problem. Like I tell people all the time that are blaming the Series S, blaming the Switch. I was like, you just don't understand that what I said before. They're doing that with AI shortcuts, and they're making you think those requirements are the requirements that you need. But if they actually optimize the game, you would need nowhere near that. But they're not doing that. Every console could be fine. But I'm telling you, you're getting scammed.
But I think these are a poor set of choices. Rich was able to get Black Myth Wukong running on a PS5 spec PC system at 60 FPS at 1080p output with high settings last year, and I think a configuration like this would be a much better option than either of the options presented in these two console releases. Lean on the upscaler a little more, compromise on pixel count, and a reasonable looking 60 FPS mode should be achievable. I do have to offer the caveat here that
I mean, at least you're able to at least get the performance 60 mode. I thought it was going to be something worse than that. But yeah, I don't know. I would have expected them to have it by now. But once again, Unreal Engine 5, I'm not a fan.
wasn't able to test later sections of the game, which I understand can be somewhat more taxing, especially on the CPU. Between the game's difficulty, length, and the wide range of modes and options I had to compare, there wasn't really time. But these framerate figures should hold true for the game's less open areas. The quality mode is a bit more similar between PS5 and Series X. Lumen is present in both consoles here, and both machines lack frame gen. But some odd lighting differences remain, but undersides of many objects, like these ferns and grasses or these sticks and fallen leaves, don't seem to have proper diffuse shading on Series X. It does seem like some screen space technique, likely Lumen GI, is applying to these objects in a manner that it didn't before though, judging from the grayish smearing between them and the forest floor. In some circumstances, this can look more correct, especially with materials that should be transparent, but I don't think this is intended behavior. If we go over to the PC version,
That's what I feel like. You see what he just said? No, they really are learning. It's not intended behavior. Because you can't just go from PC China 100% and then trying to go to the console world. I'm not going to say those guys are masters. Guys, they're not lying about that. I could see this. Like, I don't get why you would want your game to be like that. Something, but then with this, though, it's just like, what the hell's going on? Like, are anybody helping them? Or we need to find out what this is. Right? When you think the Black Myth Wukong drama is done, it's starting again here again. Because I know some people on Xbox like, so we waited a year. You're not even giving us the best version. I mean,
for instance,
yeah, and you
none
have a
of
more
the game's
powerful console.
presets match the behavior in the new Series X quality mode.
I wouldn't be
Curiously,
happy
the
about that
Series X
either.
performance mode doesn't have these problems squared up against PS5 either. PS5 also packs higher grade shadows with better resolution, and tends to showcase animated foliage more often. This isn't an exhaustive list of differences though, just the things that stick out on close examination. Image quality is a bit odd. Because of the aforementioned shading issue, Series X tends to look less defined and softer. It's sort of like a reverse sharpening effect. Plus the screen space occlusion,
Dude, this is like, like PS5 to PS5 Pro. You know what I mean? Like, what you expect? This is not good. No, this is something if you're compromising on a Switch or something, right? Might make more sense. But even then, Nintendo has DLSS and all that. And DLSS upscaling is better than this because they don't have FSR 3 and 4. But I don't get why Microsoft is getting this type of upscaling. I mean, it should be better.
tends to
I
blur
think
the
China
image
is
a
not
little
used to
bit,
Xbox
and it's
hardware.
applied
Like, only the
quite liberally.
PlayStation is there. So
But PS5 is
we gotta
actually
figure it out.
running at a lower internal resolution, at
Yeah.
about 1296p in the shots I tested, versus about 1728p on Series X. In practice though, I think PS5 actually presents a bit of a better image. Series X frame rates are generally similar to PS5, which is to say that Microsoft's machine generally holds to 30 FPS, with some drops in the occasional 16 millisecond frame. I
Okay.
didn't find evidence of tearing here, suggesting the Series X output is V-synced in this mode. Then there's balance mode. We see the same shading difference as quality mode here, with a less defined look on Xbox. Shadow resolution also takes a hit compared to the PS5 balance mode. Outside of those two differences,
Yeah, again, we see this right. We see this clarity, so much more texture on it. Same thing when things come across. Then we have this little light aspect right here. But yeah, looking at the shadow work, it's definitely lighter over here.
settings mostly seem about the same. Image quality across both machines looks fairly similar.
That's similar. Yeah, that's
Again,
the
we're
same.
in a weird spot where Series X resolution is higher, at about 1440p in the shots I tested versus about 1080p on PS5, but perceived image quality has a less obvious victor. I'd probably chalk both consoles up as seeming fairly equal in the shots I tested,
Okay.
which could speak to similarities in output resolution or to some of the lighting differences I mentioned earlier. Performance is pretty rocky. The game appears to run at roughly 50 FPS or so unlocked, with constant screen tearing. PS5 infamously logs a 45 FPS update instead, with no screen tearing whatsoever, but both consoles are transformed when set to 120Hz output in balance mode, and target 40 FPS instead, which they generally hit just fine with only minor drops. There's no tearing at 120Hz in this mode on Series X either. As a
Okay.
final note on Series X, I wanted to quickly revisit PS5 as well, to compare against the last time I looked at the PS5 code in December of 2024. Both the performance mode and balance mode are essentially the same as before, with more or less identical settings, resolution, and image quality. But the quality mode has a considerably greater internal resolution, coming in at 1296p or so now, against 1080p in December 2024. It makes sense that quality mode resolution would get a bump, given that it had been downgraded from a higher resolution around launch, though it's a little odd to see such large shifts in a game's post-launch appearance.
Well, at least it's playable. I thought it would be worse than that, reading like the bizarre port and all that, but even
The
then,
Series S version of Black Myth Wukong
Okay.
has a lot of the expected cuts. There are actually 3 full modes here: a performance, quality, and balance mode, just like the other consoles. Performance mode takes a few hits compared to Series X. Shadows are much blobbier and undefined, with a very low resolution and a heavily filtered appearance.
Okay.
And a lot of the game's foliage and ground clutter is simplified or absent. These cuts fall on top of the existing performance mode concessions, including the loss of Lumen GI. There's another big cutback though that seems to be scene specific. The fog fluid sim in the game's introduction doesn't make the cut in the Series S performance mode. It's also stripped out of the game's quality and balance modes on Series S, unfortunately. I imagine this kind of change could make some visual impacts in certain scenes later in the game as well. Wukong's rendering resolution is also slashed, falling to about 792p in my tests. The lower pixel count is reflected in a much muddier, more imprecise image with obvious artifacting.
I expected that to happen.
On the flip side though, Wukong runs at a decent 60 FPS clip on Series S in performance mode. There are no signs of frame gen here either, unlike on the much more powerful PlayStation 5. I'd expect occasional drops typically accompanied by tearing during normal, non-VRR play, but it doesn't impact the game all that much. In quality mode, we see some of the same compromises. Shadow resolution is dialed back, and foliage is somewhat sparser. But there's one glaring difference. Lumen appears to be completely gone on the weaker console. The Series S version looks dramatically different across a range of lighting conditions as a result, just like we saw when we examined the Series X performance mode. Series S clocks in at about 1080p here, down from the roughly 1728p measurement we
That's not
logged
bad for Series
on
S.
Microsoft's premium console. Expect a somewhat imprecise rendition of Black Myth Wukong, though for a Series S game, image quality seems fine.
Yeah.
Frame rates are also decent enough, clocking in with a stable 30 FPS output in my testing,
Okay.
aside from some occasional wobbles up and down like the other consoles. Balance mode on the S comes in basically as expected, with thinned out foliage, blobbier shadows, and no lumen whatsoever. It looks very similar to the quality mode, except for image quality, which is somewhat worse. Internal
Yeah,
pixel counts
that makes
clock in
sense.
at roughly 864p or so, which seems fine enough. At 60Hz output without VRR, the game runs in balanced mode with an unlocked framerate with heavy tearing, which isn't ideal, but toggling on
Don't do
120Hz
it.
output
Don't do it.
gives the game a smoother 40 FPS playback,
Yeah, that's
which I
better.
find much more pleasing.
Yeah, 120 hertz
Wukong
for the
generally
win.
hangs just fine at 40 FPS, absent momentary drops here and there. Over decades of game development, certain conventions have developed around the configuration of console.
So we get the idea here. There's going to need to be some more optimizations. Let me know what you guys think about this. You guys know how much drama has went on with this, how much blaming, but really they just need to optimize better on consoles. But will they ever let out that deal? No. So, but we know here this has nothing to do with Microsoft, and yeah, things need to get better. Ponies, sit down. Let me know what you guys think. Peace out, y'all.